Hello everyone, in this short video I'm going to introduce you the content analysis. Content analysis is widely used within qualitative methods. So for qualitative data analysis, generally speaking, we first need to gather data, right? Collect the data, and after that we enter into the analysis process. So first need to prepare and organize the data. Right? If it's too complicated, then you probably need to do some sorting or reducing the amount of data you are going to analysis. Right? Summarize it, and that means somehow you need a coding process to help you. And finally, when you get the results, you need to present data in narrative form, figures, or tables, right? And of course, during the whole process of qualitative data analysis, you need the integration of analysis and data gathering, because somehow in qualitative research, the process of analyzing data often occurs simultaneously with collecting data. This is especially true when we talk about you have no clearly defined research questions, and you know the direction, you know a little bit about the field, but you haven't identified the most important variables, you don't have a clear theory, you don't have a clearly defined research question. So when you are collecting the data, say you are doing a field work, you talk to people, you take your observational field notes, and then each day you kind of continue doing so while simultaneously looking at your data, right? Hopefully, through a couple of rounds, then you'll come up with your research question and the most important variables that you are looking for. So here I'm going to introduce you the content analysis skills. So basically we are following the process. Like the first step is you are going to highlight or select those keywords and items that you think they are most important related to your research question. So remember this, in this process, basically you already know your research question. You need to keep your research question in your mind while you are conducting your content analysis. All right, so then if you already identified or highlighted all the keywords and the items, then you can code them, assign codes to each of the keywords and items. Then you group similar codes or same codes together, come up with categories. If necessary, then subcategories, right? So the categories represents the main topics you are analyzing. Right? So think about this. Imagine this is like a very large amount of textual data. All right. So then you identified a bunch of keywords and items that you think, okay, this is related to my research question, and then you assign each of them a code, and then you group the similar codes together and come up with the topics, right? So these topics will be used in your final analysis, and you present them and see how they can help you answer your research question. Now here's one example. So this is from a document called "Can Students' Philanthropy Help to Address the Current Nonprofit Identity Crisis?" Right. So student philanthropy means you give students money, and the students act like the grant giver, right? So they invest the philanthropical money to nonprofit organizations. So instead of like traditionally foundation give money to nonprofit organizations, now the foundations grant money to students, and the students use that money to invest in nonprofit organizations. So student philanthropy hopefully the aim is students can learn by giving. Okay, so the research question here, we particularly interested in whether or not students actually learned something from students' philanthropy courses, and if they did learn something, so what kind of things they learned, right? So I only use like two examples, but then more actually. All right. So the first thing is I highlight, I keep my research question in my mind. So whether or not they learned, what kind of things they learned. All right. So I highlighted, for instance, like learned a great deal, nonprofit sector, many nonprofits also learned philanthropic causes, appreciate many, learn nonprofit issues, concerns, appreciate nonprofit organization, etc. All right. So I put all the highlighted keywords and items on the left side. So I actually used an Excel to do the basic coding. Okay, so I input all these keywords and items along with when I'm reading the raw textual data, right? So then when I highlight it, I put it in a column. All right, so learned, a great deal, right? So nonprofit sector, etc. All right, so now the next step will be, now since we already selected all the keywords and items, all right, so the next step will be signing codes to each of the keyword or items. So first, I coded learn as learn, all right, a great deal at the level. So nonprofit sector, many of these nonprofits, I all coded them as nonprofit. And also learned, I also coded as learn because I think that is the same thing as learned, right? So these are the same. They all refer to nonprofits. How devoted, so that's refer to the nonprofit workers, right? And for some philanthropic causes, so this I label them as cause, appreciate, many, and so many and a great deal. I think they all refers to the level of learning. So I assign level as a code, so coded them as level. So as you can see, the other things. All right. So etc. and etc. Now after codes, right? After all these codes, so what you're gonna do is you are going to group the similar codes or the same codes together. So for instance, learn, they should be coded together. Level, and should be coded together, right? So obviously, nonprofit, or nonprofits, and the nonprofit workers. So these are kind of the same and the similar codes. So they should be categorized together or grouped together. So here's actually non-show reorganized process. So if you put all the same or similar codes together, right? So then you automatically change the order as well. So let's compare this, right? So when before reorganization, you have like learned a great deal, nonprofit sector, many of the nonprofits, etc. After reorganization, because you put all the similar and the same codes together, then you have learned, also learned, learn, right? Appreciate, etc. So these are the similar and the same codes, but reorganized, right? So I reorganized them, all right, by grouping similar and the same codes together. Now then you can assign your subcategories and the categories to them, all right? So the first I would assign subcategory the learning outcome, and the level I say, okay, just the level. And this is nonprofits, nonprofit workers, and the causes. Now then further, because I I think learn and appreciate, all these things refer to learning outcome, right? That actually come up to my final category. One of the category is learned, because I'm interested in the first research question is whether or not the students learn, right? So the second is what kind of things did they learn? So they learn a great deal. That's refers to many things. That's refers to the level of learning. And they learned about nonprofits, right? And they learned about nonprofit workers, and they also learned about philanthropical causes. So these are the contents they learned. So I come up with two things, two categories, two large categories refer to my themes, right? One is learned, the other is contents learned, right? So because think about this, these categories gonna help you to help you answer the research questions. Yes, obviously, right? So that's my purpose. So of course you can say, okay, should you use the same, like, subcategories name as a code name as the keywords. Now sometimes it can be the same. So for instance, here learn, they are all the same, right? Keywords is learn, codes learn, subcategories and categories are very similar, right? Basically the same thing. You call it a learn. However, other things you might be a little bit different. For instance, a great deal, many, and then you assign codes as a level, right? So you didn't say, okay, how much, or I don't know, like a great deal or many, a great deal. It depends, but generally speaking, you need to come up with your own codes, all right? So then these codes should first make sense to you, and then it will help you much easier to reorganize them and help you to categorize them into subcategories and categories, so that you can come up with the main themes which could help you to answer the questions. All right. So this is the whole process. But at when you are presenting the results, all right. So this is not necessary to show the process of reorganization, right? Because this is only show to yourself, all right. As long as you reorganize them, you simply can come up with subcategories when it's necessary, right? So in this case, if we are only dealing with a small amount of textual data, it's probably not necessary to come up with a subcategory, right? You can simply like get rid of the subcategory, just come up with a larger category. So keywords, items, the first column, then codes. So after reorganization, you jump into come up with the categories. Now this doesn't necessarily have to be like only two categories. Only in this specific case, right? I think it makes sense to me. I only come up with two because I am interested in two different research questions. One is whether or not did the student learn. The other one, what kind of things did they learn, if they learn. But of course, you can say, okay, I'm still going to use like here another category. Say, okay, this is how much they learn, right? So I will still use level, and the other is what kind of things they learn. So they learned about nonprofit and their workers. I'm going to put these two together as nonprofit, and also the philanthropical philanthropic causes. So these are the solutions you are going to put it here. That's also fine, right? As long as it makes sense to you, because finally, when you present the results, it probably won't, make too much differences, right? But still, you need to come up with those larger categories which can have a group of codes, right? Similar and the same codes together. So this is the categories. So maybe then you'll think, oh, you pick those keywords and items. Does this mean like is this cherry picking, right? You only pick the most important things. But think about this: when you conduct an interview, right? So you pick the things that only occupy like 10%. So how about the rest of the 90%? Are they not useful, or what, right? So generally speaking, you are going to code with other coders, right? So to avoid being accusing of cherry picking. So this process is called validation. Now, how can you validate it? Of course, you are going to code with your peers. But generally speaking, in practice, you can actually come up with agreement, right? So for example, here, you can select, say you have 100 documents, right? You can select 10 of them, and then you code it together. When you are coding, you can discuss to each other and come up with a common coding scheme. Say, for instance, if we encounter some keywords like a great deal and many, we are going to code them as levels, right? Or if we encounter nonprofit sector, many nonprofits and nonprofit organizations, etc., etc., all related to nonprofit organizations, then we are going to all agree we are going to assign code like nonprofits to it. All right, so after you have these coding scheme, right? So this is kind of the guide for you to code independently. Then you can do the whole coding. So each of you are going to code the 100 documents independently, right? So after you all finish it, then you compare your results. So there's no rule of thumb, like how much overlaps you should get, but the valid results usually require more than 70% similarities in coding. Right, so which means all the codes, at least like 70% of the codes, even you coded independently, but they are still come up with the same results. So this is just in practice, all right. In practice, of course, this is dealing with like a small amount of textual data. Even 100 documents, it's not that much, right? You can still be able to do it. But what if you have like 1,000 or thousands of documents? Now, obviously, people would argue you can still like have 3 independent coders independently manually coded it, right? But this is really time consuming, and it's probably not a perfect way to approach these large amount of textual data. So nowadays we come up with some computer assistant text mining methods. So for instance, you can come up with word clouds. So the larger the size of the word, which means they are more frequently being used. Or you can come up with clusters. So this is only one way to cluster these large amount of textual data. So this is called word D methods, but there's many different methods for clustering anyway. So you can come up with clusters. Clusters basically means they are grouping important keywords together, right? So it's kind of like the categories, subcategories you are coming up with. All right, so the final one will be topic modeling. So this is also a text mining method that you can use to assist you, right? Come up with topics based on certain algorithms. All right, so we are not going to show a particular example here, but if we have time, we will do it later. All right. So in this video, I'm only going to make sure you understand the basic process of content analysis. So let's summarize. All right, first keywords items, highlighting them and put them in one column, and then coding them, right? Assign codes to each of your keywords and items. Afterwards, reorganize them, all right? Put same and similar codes together into a group, then come up with subcategories and categories. All right, so these categories should be the main themes that will help you answer your research question. All right, so that will be all for this short video. Thank you very much.